The debate around trans women participating in women's sports is far from over. After California Governor Gavin Newsom recently admitted on his podcast that it's a fairness issue, Whoopi Goldberg brought up the issue on The View. Let's watch.
There's been all of this debate about whether transgender athletes should be able to compete. And last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom said that he thinks that trans athletes competing in girls' and women's sports was deeply unfair. Now, I want to hear what you think.
Transgender activist Dylan Mulvaney, who sat with The View Monday, had this to say.
The last time I played a sport, I was 6 years old, and I was on a soccer team, but I assigned myself as the nurse. So I sat with the Band-Aids. And so, in the words of Wicked, I am not that girl. But a dear friend of mine, Skylar, he is a trans athlete. His handle's Pink Manta Ray. That's someone who I really look to for guidance. And I think that is what's tricky, is like, now stepping in this identity. I'm still like a baby trans. You know, I've only 3 years in. Tomorrow's my anniversary.
Your friend went from... But Whoopi further added to the discussion on transgender rights and participation in sports. Let's watch.
I think part of the problem that the trans community is facing, and it's the same problem that women face, is if you don't know anything about our bodies, you don't know how it works. So when you come in and you say, oh, you know, these are men, you know, competing against women, you're assuming that the women are weak and just can't do anything except be here. Have you seen female athletes? They know what they're doing. So I'm not sure what's going on or why this is an issue. The same for me as when people say, oh, you know, I don't know how I feel about you. You do. God doesn't make mistakes.
No.
And the challenge is not to the trans people, it's to the people who are not trans. That's what God is looking to see, how you treat people.
So in these clips that I saw on social media, I actually didn't particularly disagree with Dylan Mulvaney, didn't say anything controversial. What Whoopi said didn't make a lot of sense to me. It's not about, I certainly agree with showing trans people respect and non-discrimination and all of that, absolutely. It is not being disrespectful or discriminatory to say that certain categories like women's sports, it just does not make sense to have people who would have certain biological advantages to be competing against cis women, to use that term. And that is an attitude that like 80% of Americans, including a vast majority of Democrats, hold, and it's not controversial. I don't know why the ladies of The View think that
I didn't know what she was talking about. And what she was talking about is the emotionality that she ascribed to the perception of some women. This is not an emotional issue, as you said. It's a biological issue. And the fairness should be based on that.
Yeah, the fairness is very important. Do you think, you know, this issue has become so explosive recently. It gets talked about so much. We talk about it a lot. It's not like I'm obsessed with the issue, but it's something people do care about. And maybe it's not the biggest or most important thing, but that cuts both ways. Like, I'll hear liberals say, why do you care so much about, you know, there's a small number of you know, trans women in women's sports out-competing women. I'm like, well, yes, it's a small number of people, but if it's allowed to happen, the winner is going to be every time a trans person, that's going to matter to the, you know, those girls who compete. Athletes has something to do with acceptance to elite colleges and all of that. It matters to those families. If you're saying it's not an important issue, why are you fighting to the death to maintain the status quo, which so many people think is just very silly?
Well, on one hand, I am a kind of fundamentalist and a romantic when it comes to the Declaration of Independence. I do believe that the core mission of the United States, our mission statement is that document. All men are created equal. And so to me, as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. However, I agree with you that what about justice for those girls on those teams? And so I feel very strongly that trans Americans are equal in the eyes of God, therefore should be equal in the eyes of the law. And I don't understand why we are minimizing the very legitimate concerns of girls and their families who are trying to get ahead in sports in situations where, as you said, the issue is a biological advantage. And I think that we must seek to have, no pun intended, a fair playing field here for every American.
And just different accommodations where appropriate. Can there be, could there be a trans women league for whatever it is? Is there a, and then in terms of like the facilities for young, I don't care about the public restrooms for adults, whatever, who cares? But for, for locker rooms for younger people, and it can be a scary environment anyway for all sorts of reasons. Can we have more privacy and more accommodation so that everyone feels more comfortable? Seems perfectly reasonable to me without forcing men into women or women onto men.
Well, the privacy issue in terms of bathrooms, that to me is something very, very different, and I think is being used against trans Americans.
No, I agree to an extent for the bathrooms, but
as well,
yeah.
making those women, something.
The prison thing is difficult though, because that is the most obvious situation to me where someone could take advantage of now I'm a woman or now whatever in order to get themselves into a safer prison arrangement.
And equally concerning is what can happen to some of these trans women when they are transported
Certainly.
into these male prisons. And I think that is equally of concern to me. In
Yes,
fact, more
that is a
concern.
problem
I think
both
that's
ways.
a greater danger.
Well,
Someone could legitimately have a sense that is a greater danger, whatever it is.
No, sir, that could absolutely be a danger. Yes, putting a
involved there.
trans woman in a man's prison, huge danger. But I could also see a man describing their gender identity as woman to get into the women's prison, which is
Why
a
would
safer
somebody
environment.
That makes no sense. Why would somebody and then go commit
man
a
would
crime?
rather be in a woman's prison than a man's prison.
Wait, a man would become trans and then say, I'm going to commit a crime?
No,
What
you're
makes
misunderstanding
sense?
me. No, you're misunderstanding. Not to commit a crime, to get out of the men's prison, because the men's prison is a much more dangerous and place prone to sexual abuse of men.
But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that the president demanded the transfer of trans women from women's prisons into the male prisons, where they are afraid for their lives.
Right. To me, this is an obvious example for what I just said, a separate accommodation, a space for
Well, you're not going to build a special
people.
prison for trans
Well, you
people.
could have a cell. You could have a different cell block. You could have a different.
Well, I think they should be protected.
Yeah.
If the president is going to demand that they must go to a men's prison, then absolutely they should have special protection.
Yeah.
And that is what is apparently not happening. And I hope that it's something about our having a conversation here. We'll bring that conversation up, because I'm very, very concerned. And some of the trans women who have been forced into the male prisons have expressed that they're afraid for their lives.
It just seems. No, I get that. It seems to me that common sense can prevail on this subject if people just talk about it the way we're talking about it now, and just apply just a little bit dignity and respect for everyone involved, but reasonableness, and that will be fine. And I think too much of that just doesn't take place on both sides, with a lot of with some very cruel opposition to trans people coming from the right, and some just really brain dead attitudes about what is a reasonable accommodation coming from not even the left necessarily, but liberals and progressives.
Well, we've become the disunited states of America. We have forgotten the first principle, e pluribus unum, out of many one. The richness of this country and the foundational principle of this country is that we are many kinds of people with different views, different ethnicities, different cultures, and now different sexes and sexual orientations and genders and all of that. But we are united by our fealty to certain common principles. And we are forgetting what those common principles are of fairness, of justice, of liberty for all. And that's what I feel we need to get back to, because when you discuss all these things within that context, then there is a both and. There is a yin and yang. There is a learning from one another. There is, as Eisenhower said, that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. So I'm glad that there are times when you and I can agree or learn from each other. I think that's as important as the times in which we spar.
I think we're having a lot of fun. I very much agree. And we're going to do it again tomorrow. Is that right? You're back with us tomorrow?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And we hope you're having fun too.
Yeah, we hope you're having fun as well. I think you are. That does it for us today on Rising. We will be back tomorrow. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you tomorrow.